Joining me now is Democratic Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. He also sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So I want to start with this idea that Republicans are treating these very real challenges. I mean, immigration reform, long outdated. Obviously, something needs to be done about what's happening at the border, but they're treating it as kind of a game. You posted on Twitter this, which caught my attention. I think if Democrats were holding up funding for the defense of 3 allies, unless we got an unrelated thing, and then we said no to the very thing we demanded because our nominee told us to kill it, the media would justifiably go thermonuclear on us. That said it better than I would say it. But just give us a sense of how crazy the situation is in the Senate right now.
Well, I remember, talking to a lot of the pro-Ukraine members of the Republican conference, and they came to us and said, look, we don't think we have the votes in the Senate or the House unless we do a strong border bill. And we said, great. The president is proposing, this $14 billion emergency supplemental to basically restore order at the border. And they said, no, we need policy changes. And I got in some, pretty heated conversations with some of the more reasonable Republicans saying, why in the heck are we
You can say hell, it's
I can say hell on MSNBC. I apologize. Why in the heck are we tying a domestic policy priority to an international policy priority? I can't think of an example in American history where one thing is dependent on the other in quite so obnoxious of a way, but that was the deal. And so Chris Murphy and others negotiated with James Lankford, who has got a reputation as one of the more conservative members of the entire Senate, and especially on immigration. So we had a very tough negotiation, and then we wake up one morning and realize that the thing they were asking for was really just an excuse to try to kill Ukraine funding. Now, there may still be a cohort of Republicans in the Senate, at least, who care enough about Ukraine and care enough about a result on the border that they're going to go through with this. But it just shows that the definition of conservatism at this point has flown out the window, and it's basically whatever Donald Trump wants.
Well, it seems like what Donald Trump wants is to run on the border. To run on the border as being in crisis and not actually have a solution. Don't you think that's a big part of the issue here?
That's 100% what's going on, because there's no substantive argument left for them. Joe Biden has gone, I think, further than a lot of progressives are comfortable with.
Yeah, it's an imperfect bill. A lot of people don't like it.
It makes me pretty uncomfortable, but, for Ukraine, I am prepared to swallow some of these provisions that I certainly would not have written or agreed to under other circumstances. But here we are trying to forge a bipartisan compromise because, frankly, the fate of Europe, the fate of the free world is at stake. And Republicans woke up one morning, some of them went to Mar-a-Lago, some of them read a tweet, and now they're against the very thing that they demanded.
Including doing something about the border. I mean, you just can't make it up in the storylines. It's hard to explain to the public, though, which is a challenge. I did want to ask you, obviously there are decisions and discussions happening in the Situation Room. The White House and the Defense Department haven't announced any specific steps yet on what they're going to do to respond to these strikes that killed 3 service members. But along the lines of the seriousness or unseriousness in the political system, I did want to read you some of the things that some senators tweeted immediately after these strikes. So Lindsey Graham tweeted, "It's hit Iran now, hit them hard." John Cornyn simply tweeted, "Target Tehran." Tom Cotton said in a statement, "The only answer to these attacks must be devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist voices." Now, we all agree something needs to happen in response, but they all have had this position for a long time.
That's right.
What's that about?
I think the first thing is, look, this is a terrible tragedy. It is fortunate, although any loss of life is too much, is fortunate and worth noting that we've lost fewer service members during the Biden administration than we did during the Trump administration. But again, any loss of life is too many lives lost. We have to retaliate, but we also have to manage the potential for escalation. That is a very real risk in the region. It is a tinderbox. And I trust Secretary Austin, Secretary Blinken, and the President of the United States himself to calibrate that retaliation. And to your point, Lindsey, Tom, John Cornyn, these guys have been waking up every morning looking for an opportunity to engage in a kinetic action against Iran since I got to the Senate 11 years ago, and that will never change. This is their latest reason for wanting to have a war. But I don't think that just because they're tweeting about it, that's the right response. We're going to have to respond, but we're going to have to do so in a way that reduces rather than increases the risk of escalation.
Would you be comfortable if they struck Iran within the borders?
I don't think so, but I'd like to understand what they are thinking about, and how to calibrate the response. I think the response has to be swift and successful, but I'm not here to opine about whether it should be in or out of the Iranian borders or through a proxy or however they decide to do it. I wait to be briefed, and we need to give them some decision space. The last thing that the United States government needs is 535 potential commanders-in-chief all trying to out-tough each other.
Waiting to be briefed, quite a novel thing you just suggested there. I know we're going around the world, but you do work on a number of issues, and I did want to ask you, you gave a floor speech that really stuck with me. I reread it this morning, just about Trump's basic claim that anything he does, he's not susceptible to the law, essentially. This is kind of a part of this immunity argument we're waiting for a legal ruling on. Talk to me a little bit about, because sometimes people think this is mired up in courts. It's not about that. It's about a person who is the commander-in-chief, who would have a number of things at his disposal, not being above the law.
Yeah, I think what's changed since the last Trump term is now nobody can say they weren't warned. Nobody can say that this is just a rhetorical flourish and he doesn't know the government, or, you know, he's just a showman. What was it? Take him seriously, not literally. I think we need to take him absolutely literally. The other thing that has happened is he's now got white shoe law firms making these arguments in federal court. A judge asked his attorney, hold on, if the president ordered the murder of one of his political opponents using SEAL Team 6, would that be prosecutable? And they said, no, not unless there was a successful impeachment in the House and a conviction in the Senate. And so what does that mean? It means that if the president of the United States can find 34 votes to acquit, he or she can use, not just violate any law, but use the power of the American military against his political opponents. So this is not just, wow, that guy's really nuts. This is the guy's promising to be an authoritarian and use the power of the government to maintain control. And I think we have to take that very seriously.
Listen to what he says. He's telling us what he wants to do. Senator Brian Schatz, thank you so much for joining me here this evening. Really appreciate it. Coming up.